You can almost picture the two completely separate meetings happening at the same time. In one room, it's all handshakes and polite smiles. Prime Minister Ishaba sits across from Narendra Modi. They talk about strategic cooperation and economic partnership. A number is agreed upon: 500,000 people over 5 years. 50,000 of them, skilled IT professionals and healthcare workers from India, meant to be a lifeline for Japan's shrinking, aging workforce, a country where deaths are drastically outpacing births. It's a clean, logical solution to a demographic crisis. Then you cut to a street in Yokohama. It's loud. There are no polite smiles. Thousands of people are marching, holding signs. The signs don't say welcome or thank you for helping. They say protect Japanese culture and prioritize local workers. The anger is palpable. This isn't just a small fringe group. We're seeing mass demonstrations in Tokyo and Osaka too. And it's this strange, stark contrast, the sterile, high-level handshake solving a labor crisis, and the raw, emotional protest in the street fearing a cultural one that shows the deep crack forming right down the middle of modern Japan.
It's a striking image, isn't it? And what's fascinating here is that the policy response, that handshake, it's driven almost entirely by sheer demographic necessity.
Exactly. You touched on the core problem. Japan is facing this, well, alarming reality. The population isn't just aging, it's actively shrinking dramatically.
Deaths are outpacing births by over 1 million people every year.
1 million a year. That's staggering.
It is. And this creates a chronic systemic labor shortage. It's hitting every sector, from high-skilled tech and finance right down to basic care work, construction.
So it's not some future problem they're planning for. It's right now. A daily crisis for companies, for hospitals.
Absolutely. It's happening today, which means incremental changes, small policy tweaks.
Yeah.
They just won't cut it anymore.
Right. This deficit is so huge, it demands something big. Importing people at scale seems like the only option on the table, policy-wise.
It seems to be the direction they've chosen, yes.
So let's really unpack this official solution, this action plan for India-Japan human resource exchange and cooperation. It was finalized, August 2025?
That's correct. August 2025.
And this isn't just, a standard trade deal. It's framed specifically as a strategic human resource exchange.
Extremely strategic. I mean, look at the headline number.
Yeah.
The goal is to exchange over 500,000 personnel. That's in both directions, mind you, over the next 5 years.
500,000 people. That alone tells you the scale they're thinking about.
It does. But the really significant part, I think, is the target within that number. Bringing 50,000 skilled personnel and potential talents from India to Japan.
So it's not just volume, it's focused.
Very focused. High demand, high value fields. You mentioned IT professionals and healthcare workers.
Yeah, the opening highlights those.
And those are precisely the two sectors where this demographic crunch, this aging and shrinking workforce, is genuinely threatening to cause service collapse. They need people in those roles.
Okay, so if Japan is investing this much political capital, this much effort into attracting these 50,000 skilled workers, what's the actual mechanism? It can't just be like simplifying a visa form, can it?
Oh, absolutely not. It has to be a vast, multi-pronged effort. And it is.
So what's that look like?
Well, for starters, we're seeing very specific, targeted efforts for attracting the high-skilled individuals.
Like what, for example?
For instance, the Japanese government is actively facilitating special missions. These are delegations from major Japanese companies, and think big players in semiconductors, AI, robotics.
The future-facing industries.
Exactly. And these companies are traveling directly to top Indian higher education institutions. They're not just posting jobs online and waiting.
They're going straight to the source.
Precisely. They're raising awareness on campus, actively recruiting, essentially trying to build direct employment pipelines from Indian universities to Japanese tech firms.
That makes sense. Going beyond just immediate hiring, though, are they trying to build longer-term connections, academic ties, research pipelines?
Yes, absolutely. That's a key part of it. They've enhanced existing programs, like the Sakura Science Exchange Program.
I've heard of that one.
Right. It brings Indian students and researchers over to Japan. And often there's a specific emphasis on encouraging female researchers in STEM fields, which is another area Japan needs to boost.
And policy dialogues, too.
Correct. There's the bilateral high-level policy dialogue on education. It's focused more on streamlining what happens after the education part, making sure internships actually convert into stable, long-term employment. They want these connections to stick.
I saw a mention of a newer program, MIA Set 2. That sounds like it's specifically designed as that crucial entry point, that bridge into the Japanese professional world. How does that one work?
Ah, yes, MII Set 2. launched by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It's really designed as a catalyst, you could say, for these long-duration talent exchanges.
How so?
Well, it invites select Indian university students, and postgraduates too, for visits to Japan. But the core is a month-long internship, actual training within a Japanese company.
A full month embedded in a company. That's quite an investment.
It is. And the strategic goal is clear. It helps de-risk the recruitment process for Japanese companies. They get a real look at the student. And it helps overcome those initial, sometimes daunting cultural and workplace barriers for the student.
So both sides get a trial run, essentially.
Exactly. Both the company and the student can assess the fit before anyone commits to a full multi-year contract or relocation. It's sort of an expensive, but probably effective form of highly targeted corporate matchmaking.
Okay, that covers the high-skilled end, the engineers, the researchers. But Japan's labor shortage, as you said, it goes way beyond just the tech hubs. They need workers in core services, manufacturing, construction. How are they tackling that broader gap?
Right, that's where the enhancement of existing workforce programs comes in. Specifically, the Specified Skilled Worker System, usually just called SSW.
SSW.
This is absolutely crucial for filling shortages in those areas that don't necessarily require an advanced degree, but are essential to the economy. And Japan is making a huge push here, striving to cover all 16 SSW categories for testing in India.
16 categories. That's a really wide range, isn't it? Can you give us a feel for what kinds of jobs that covers?
Oh, absolutely. Think about critical fields like nursing care. Hugely important given the aging population. Then there's construction, building maintenance, food and beverage manufacturing, industrial machinery parts. Those are just 5 key examples. Agriculture, hospitality. It's broad.
And making the testing available in India is key.
It's essential. They're undertaking this massive logistical effort to establish new test centers across all 5 major regions of India: northeast, south, west, and northeast.
Why so spread out?
Because a centralized system, maybe just in Delhi or Mumbai, would simply be inaccessible to the vast majority of workers they're trying to reach across India. This decentralization, it really shows how serious they are about making this pathway functional, making it work at scale.
But even with accessible testing, maybe the single biggest barrier, the non-policy one, is language. And cultural readiness, too. You can approve 500,000 visas, but if the workers can't communicate effectively or adapt to the Japanese work environment, that whole thing could fall apart, couldn't it?
You've absolutely hit on the non-negotiable factor there: language and cultural integration. Both governments recognize this, and frankly, they have to. They're pouring resources into trying to overcome it.
How is India contributing on that front?
India is using its own program, the Pravasi Kaushal Vikas Yojana, PKVY, to offer supplementary pre-departure language training. It's focused on occupational language, practical Japanese needed for the specific job category.
So trying to give them a baseline before they even leave India.
Exactly. Get them started. And Japan is supporting that effort from their side, too.
With money. Subsidies.
Yes. Japan offers training subsidies, often through initiatives like one called INPAT-CD. This helps Japanese companies manage the costs of that crucial post-arrival integration language classes, cultural orientation within the company.
And they're also promoting Japanese language learning in India itself.
They are, through programs like the NOI and Go Partners Initiative. This dispatches Japanese citizens, often retirees, actually, or recent graduates, to secondary schools in India to support the local Japanese language teachers.
Interesting. So it's a long-term investment, really, building a Japan-ready potential workforce years down the line.
That's the idea. It's playing the long game on language.
Now, here's a part of the plan that I found really interesting because it moves beyond just pure economic necessity or standard skills. There's this focus on soft power exchange, specifically traditional Indian wellness practices.
Indeed. That's a fascinating component. The action plan explicitly includes establishing centers of excellence in yoga and Ayurveda in Japan.
Supervised by India's own Ministry of AYUSH.
Correct. And you have to understand, this isn't just some nice-to-have cultural curiosity. It's highly strategic policy.
How so? What's the strategy?
They are directly leveraging India's deep expertise in traditional wellness and applying it directly against one of Japan's most critical modern needs: geriatric care.
Connecting yoga and Ayurveda to the aging population.
Precisely. Yeah. Given Japan's rapidly aging society, the burden on the healthcare system, especially for elder care, is immense. So India is providing not just potentially specialized manpower, but also knowledge systems through these centers, specifically aimed at helping Japan manage the health and well-being of its elderly population. It creates joint value in a really non-traditional economic sector.
So you look at all these pieces, the high-skilled recruitment, the SSW expansion, the language training, even the wellness centers, and on paper, this policy looks meticulously designed. It seems comprehensive, mutually beneficial, almost like a diplomatic and economic marvel.
From a purely policy perspective, yes. It addresses a critical need with a structured plan involving a major partner.
And yet, as we saw right at the start, the second this high-level handshake was announced, it just ignited this massive domestic backlash on the streets.
And that takes us right to the heart of the challenge, doesn't it? This friction between what looks like sound, necessary economic policy and the complex, often messy, social reality on the ground.
The protests you described, they weren't small.
No, the manifestation of the protest is significant. We're talking mass demonstrations, tens of thousands of people marching, and not just in one city, but across major population centers, Tokyo, Osaka, Yokohama.
So it's definitely not just some small, easily dismissed fringe group venting online.
Absolutely not. This is visible, public, and it seems to be a rising tide of national anxiety being expressed openly.
Let's get into the core fears then. What's fueling this anger? The signs you mentioned explicitly said things like protect Japanese culture and prioritize local workers.
Those two slogans really capture the main currents, I think. The biggest concern, arguably, is cultural shock.
Explain that a bit more.
Well, Japan has, for various historical and geographic reasons, maintained a very high degree of cultural homogeneity compared to many other developed nations. There's a strong sense of shared identity, shared norms, shared values.
And the fear is losing that.
The fear is that a large, relatively rapid influx of people from a very different cultural background, even one as rich and established as India's, risks social and cultural upheaval. That it could undermine these traditionally preserved values, maybe Japan's unique work discipline, things that many people feel define the nation.
So it's a fear of the national identity being diluted or maybe becoming unrecognizable.
For many citizens, yes. I think they genuinely feel that the Japan they know, their way of life, is at risk from such rapid demographic change driven by immigration.
It's important, though, to look beyond just the cultural fear, right? There's also a clear economic anxiety expressed in those signs. Prioritize local workers. Is there substance to that worry about wages?
There is definitely a clear economic anxiety running alongside the cultural concerns. Opponents worry that importing foreign labor, even the highly skilled indie IT professionals, will inevitably suppress local wages.
Particularly in sectors that might already feel squeezed.
Exactly. Manufacturing is one area often mentioned where there's already pressure. And even the IT sector, while growing, is becoming increasingly competitive globally. When domestic workers feel their livelihoods, their ability to command a certain salary, are threatened by incoming labor, well, that economic fear becomes a very potent motivator for grassroots opposition.
And it often merges with the cultural anxieties, doesn't it? Making it harder to untangle.
Very much so. The two often reinforce each other.
And this grassroots anger, this combination of cultural and economic fear, it's not just staying on the streets. It's having a measurable impact on the actual political landscape now, isn't it? Moving from protest signs to the ballot box.
That is perhaps the most worrying trend for the government pushing this policy. This public anxiety is being effectively channeled into political mobilization.
How are we seeing that?
We've seen, for example, the anti-immigration Sanseido Party achieve really significant gains in recent local and national elections. They've substantially increased their seat count, particularly in areas that are feeling these demographic pressures most acutely.
And they run on explicitly anti-immigration platforms.
Oh, yes. They champion specific policies like demanding immediate caps on the SSW program numbers, pushing for subsidies to prioritize domestic training and hiring first, and wanting to enforce far stricter language and cultural integration requirements before any worker can even be brought in under these schemes.
So what started as maybe just anxiety or street protest is now being validated, formalized into mainstream political action.
That seems to be the trajectory, yes. It signals a potentially major roadblock for the government's plans.
Now, to really understand this anxiety, not just as a political force, but as a human emotion, we heard that anecdote about Akiko. She's a community center volunteer in Yokohama, and her concern wasn't framed in explicitly xenophobic terms, but more as this deep anxiety about identity loss. What was the root of her specific fear?
Akiko's perspective is so crucial because it helps us grasp the profound social complexity here. Her anxiety wasn't really about, the national debt or Japan's GDP growth or macroeconomics.
It was much more personal, more local.
Exactly. It was rooted in her immediate community, her local ward, her neighborhood. She focused specifically on traditions, particularly her local shrine festival.
The Matsuri.
Right. An event that, for her, has barely changed in generations. It serves as this really important anchor for community identity, for social cohesion in her neighborhood. Her fear, the thing that kept her up at night, was imagining thousands of people from a completely different culture suddenly moving into her small ward.
And what did she fear would happen?
She feared that the traditions that define her life, that anchor her sense of place, the festival, the specific community practices, the way neighbors interact, would simply become unrecognizable. Or maybe worse, just fade away because there wouldn't be enough local participation, or the foreign presence would feel overwhelming and change the very nature of the event.
That's a profound social challenge, isn't it? It's not irrational. It's a deep-seated, very human fear of rapid change and loss of identity, loss of connection to place.
It absolutely is. And it highlights the core issue. Japan is essentially importing what it sees as economic stability, a solution to the labor crisis, but it's simultaneously importing this massive social variable. And that variable is proving highly volatile.
Which makes their chosen model feel quite precarious, doesn't it? Dependent on managing these deep-seated fears.
It does. And this volatility, this inherent social friction in the Japanese model, becomes even more stark when you contrast it with how another major Asian economic power, China, is approaching its own somewhat similar challenges around labor needs and demographic shifts.
Okay, let's definitely make that contrast, because China is also facing pressures, right? Especially in manufacturing. An aging population, too, to some extent. But their primary response seems fundamentally different from Japan's big bet on mass immigration.
That's correct. Instead of relying primarily on importing hundreds of thousands of foreign workers, which, as Japan's experience is showing, introduces this really volatile social variable, China has strategically focused first on internal technological solutions to address its labor shortages.
Trying to solve the problem from within first, using technology.
Exactly. An approach designed to minimize that kind of domestic social friction we're seeing flare up in Japan.
Let's go back to Kenji, the fictional small manufacturer in Osaka we talked about. He desperately needs more workers, but he finds the whole Japan-India agreement just overwhelming. The integration challenges, the language, the cultural differences. He just wants a solution for his factory floor that doesn't create a whole new set of social problems for his business.
Kenji's dilemma is very real for many Japanese SMEs. Now, if Kenji were to look across the East China Sea, he'd see a potentially contrasting model in action.
How so?
Well, consider a similar-sized factory, maybe in Qingdao, facing a similar labor shortage. What's happened there, in many cases? That Chinese factory likely received municipal grants, government support, specifically designated for automation capital.
So, money for robots.
Essentially, yes. Installing robotic arms, maybe investing in highly subsidized CNC semi-automated machinery, and crucially, instead of laying off staff or bringing in lots of new foreign workers, they often use state-run vocational training programs to upskill their existing local staff.
To manage the new technology.
Exactly. So the state subsidized the capital investment, making the robots affordable, and then it helped provide the training so the current workforce could operate and maintain the upgraded, more automated production line.
So the labor gap gets filled, or at least significantly reduced, by technology. And the skills of the local workforce are enhanced at the same time, not through mass migration.
That's the strategic difference in emphasis. And this isn't just happening randomly. It's central to China's big industrial strategy, Made in China 2025.
Right, I remember that initiative.
A key goal within that was explicitly to increase the automation adoption rate, often measured by the number of industrial robots per 10,000 workers. They aimed to boost it from around 33% back in 2015 to a very ambitious 64% by 2025.
That's a huge jump in automation.
It is. By investing heavily in automation, subsidizing it, China addresses its manufacturing labor needs domestically, moves its industry up the value chain towards higher productivity, and minimizes the need for large-scale, potentially lower-skilled immigration for those factory roles, thereby avoiding, or at least significantly lessening, the kind of social friction Japan is currently grappling with.
Okay, so it seems like China is tackling the sheer need for labor primarily with technology, boosting domestic capacity, and then is it using its international partnerships more for higher-level talent exchange, but maybe on more defined, structured terms?
That appears to be the pattern, yes. It's a different approach to integrating with the global talent pool. Let's look again at the flow of skilled talent. We had Rohan, our fictional, highly skilled IT engineer from Bangalore, who chose Japan.
Right. He's got the skills Japan wants, but now he's facing this social and political uncertainty. Seeing protests against people like him, his career path suddenly feels kind of hostage to Japanese public sentiment.
Exactly. That instability is a major risk factor, isn't it? Especially for someone making a specialized multi-year career commitment abroad. You want predictability.
You definitely do.
Now, contrast Rohan's situation with his hypothetical cousin. Let's say she took a job working on a major Chinese-led Belt and Road initiative, the BRI infrastructure project, maybe in Pakistan or Central Asia or Africa.
Okay, so working on a big BRI project, how is her situation different?
For the cousin, the pathway was likely characterized by much greater stability. We're talking multi-year, often high-paying contracts that are backed by clear bilateral economic agreements between China and the host country.
Tied to specific large-scale projects.
Critically, yes. These jobs are linked to state-backed infrastructure development ports, railways, power plants. This makes them far less vulnerable to the day-to-day fluctuations of domestic public opinion or political shifts compared to a national immigration policy like Japan's, which directly impacts local communities and becomes a target for popular sentiment.
So this project-based talent exchange model, underpinned by long-term government-to-government economic interests, feels inherently more stable and predictable for the skilled worker involved.
It certainly appears more structured and less susceptible to immediate social backlash. And China actively structures these kinds of long-duration exchanges to foster deep long-term relationships and also ensure a degree of policy alignment.
How do they do that?
A really good example is a specific program at Tsinghua University, which is, as you know, a top-tier institution in China. It's called the International Master of Public Administration in the BRI program, MPA-BRI.
Okay, a master's program focused on the BRI, but how does an academic program create stability and these people-to-people bonds better than just, say, a straightforward job contract?
Well, the MPA-BRI program is very specifically designed. It targets promising mid-career talents from BRI partner countries. We're talking senior government officials, managers from state-owned enterprises, academic personnel, and they get full scholarships.
So they're bringing in future leaders from partner countries.
Exactly. The curriculum focuses heavily on China's own development experiences, on public policy analysis, on shared economic strategy related to the BRI. The investment isn't just in the individual's technical skills. It's about cultivating a shared understanding, a common framework for thinking about development goals and methodologies among the people who will be shaping policy back in their home countries.
So by training these senior officials and managers, China is essentially building long-term policy alignment and understanding, making those economic corridors potentially more predictable and stable for decades to come. Much more strategic than just individual career contracts.
That seems to be the long-term strategic aim, yes. Fostering alignment through education and shared experience.
This brings us right back to that core Japanese anxiety we discussed. The fear of cultural loss, of identity degradation. If Japan is visibly struggling to manage social cohesion with this new influx of cultures, how does China manage the pressures of globalization while seemingly actively reinforcing its own national identity?
That's a crucial question. And China's strategy appears to be very proactive and long-term. They explicitly treat culture not as something fragile to be protected from the world, but as the core national strength.
Culture as strength.
Yes. Providing internal cohesion, serving as the carrier for innovation, and acting as the basis for their global projection. They seem to manage globalization not primarily by building walls against outside influence, but by actively strengthening and promoting their own cultural framework, which is often explicitly rooted in its deep history, its Confucian traditions, its philosophical heritage.
Emphasizing its uniqueness, but also its ability to engage globally.
Exactly. Highlighting its expansive nature, its profound history, its inclusivity, often noting its historical ability to learn from other civilizations while maintaining its own distinct core identity.
That sounds like a massive state-led effort, though, ensuring cultural stability runs alongside economic growth.
It certainly appears to be a significant focus of state policy, yes. And it translates directly into global outreach through cultural diplomacy.
And the main instrument for that is?
The key instrument, arguably, has been the worldwide network of Confucius Institutes, or CIs.
Right. They're quite well known.
They are recognized globally as symbols, as platforms for transmitting the Chinese language and Chinese culture abroad. The stated aim is often about cultivating a benign global image, improving cultural connections, fostering mutual understanding.
Now, we do have to acknowledge Confucius Institutes have faced quite a bit of criticism, haven't they? Especially in the West. in the US and parts of the EU, concerns about academic freedom, transparency, influence.
That criticism absolutely exists, and it's important we report it impartially. CIs have faced accusations, yes, that they might act as propaganda tools for the Chinese government, or that their funding structures could give Beijing undue leverage over host academic institutions, potentially infringing on academic freedom or discouraging discussion of sensitive topics.
And this has led to some closures, hasn't it?
It has led to closures or reorganizations of CIs at some universities in Western countries, fueled by these concerns. However, it's equally important for balance to present the perspective of supporters and many participants.
What do they argue?
They often argue that these fears are overblown, or sometimes politically motivated, that the CIs, in practice, perform the straightforward and generally positive function of facilitating Chinese language, teaching a skill in high demand, and promoting cultural appreciation through activities like calligraphy, cooking classes, film screenings. They'd say the knowledge gained equips students with valuable, employable skills and helps create necessary cross-cultural understanding by connecting China's development narrative with the rest of the world.
So, two very different perspectives on their impact.
Definitely. But stepping back, China's overall effort, including the CIs, shows this very focused, long-term strategy for intellectual and cultural outreach. It's aimed at securing global understanding, maybe even acceptance, of its development path and its place in the world. And that proactive approach to cultural projection stands in pretty stark contrast, doesn't it, to Japan's current, more reactive struggle with internal cultural friction stemming from its immigration policy.
That's a really clear contrast. Okay, let's pivot now to the wider implications. Looking beyond the domestic situation in Japan and the comparison with China, what are the broader geopolitical and economic consequences of this big Japan-India strategy? This policy is clearly more than just a labor deal. It feels like a major piece of Tokyo's foreign policy.
Oh, absolutely. It's fundamental. This India partnership is explicitly framed as a crucial component of the Japan-India Special Strategic and Global Partnership.
That's the official name for the relationship.
Yes, and it directly supports Japan's overarching foreign policy vision for a free and open Indo-Pacific, or FOIP.
How does bringing in Indian workers support FOIP?
Well, in a geopolitical context, forging deeper economic and human ties with India, a major democratic power in the region, is seen by Tokyo as absolutely crucial for strengthening strategic partnerships. It builds ballast in the Indo-Pacific, particularly given the shared interests both countries have in regional stability, maritime security, and sustained economic growth outside of other dominant spheres of influence.
And this strategic commitment, it's backed by serious money too, right? You mentioned that 5 trillion yen investment target.
Yes, the agreement includes Japan aiming for a total investment, public and private, combined of 5 trillion yen in India over 5 years.
5 trillion yen. What does that translate to, roughly?
At current exchange rates, that's somewhere in the ballpark of 32 billion US dollars. It's a profound commitment.
And what does that number signify strategically?
It signifies that Japan views India not just as a source of labor, but as a critical long-term economic partner. This investment isn't just token money. It's planned for major infrastructure projects, boosting manufacturing capacity in India, collaborating on tech development. It really underscores how seriously Japan needs to diversify its economic relationships, build more resilient supply chains, and why it consistently identifies India in business surveys as the top, or one of the top, promising countries for overseas business over the medium term.
Okay, so it's vital for Japan. But flipping it around, from India's perspective, this partnership must be equally critical, mustn't it? Especially given India's own internal labor challenges, despite having this enormous population.
It's absolutely vital for India. You know, India is, paradoxically perhaps, the world's largest exporter of migrant workers. Estimates are around 18 million Indians working abroad globally.
18 million, wow.
Yet despite that outflow, India faces these severe domestic workforce issues. One really shocking reality is that estimates suggest less than 10% of India's working-age population has received any form of formal technical training.
Less than 10% with technical skills.
It's incredibly low. And compounding that, unemployment among highly educated youth people with degrees stands alarmingly high, maybe around 13% or even more in some surveys. So they have the demographic numbers, the youth bulge, but they lack the widespread high-value skill base needed for a modern, globalized manufacturing and service economy.
So for India, this Japanese partnership is essentially an invaluable opportunity, isn't it? A chance to get skill development, practical training, and job matching in exactly those high value-added fields IT, advanced manufacturing, healthcare that India is desperately trying to strengthen through its own domestic policies like Make in India?
Precisely. It's a mechanism for potentially hundreds of thousands of Indians to gain the quality of training and international work experience necessary to eventually help drive India's own economic transformation and hopefully employ more of its vast youth population domestically in more advanced, better-paying roles down the line.
Okay, this brings us back then to the bigger picture, the regional labor ecosystem in Asia. We've got Japan introducing this element of volatility, perhaps, through its necessary but socially risky immigration push. And we have China focusing more on internal technology and external stability through things like BRI. How does China's model factor into the overall health and balance of the Asian labor market?
Well, China's consistent economic growth over recent decades and the relative stability of its regional partnerships have been pretty pivotal, you could argue, for maintaining a reasonably balanced Asian labor market ecosystem. China's strategic investments in automation, for example, aren't just an internal Chinese policy. They act as a leading indicator, a potential model, for the future of manufacturing across Asia. It points towards a future based more on high-value added production, relying less on importing vast amounts of raw manpower and more on capital investment and upskilling the existing workforce.
So, in effect, China's approach might be creating a more predictable, perhaps more technologically advanced economic anchor in the region, which differs fundamentally from Japan's current, more socially fluctuating approach to its labor needs.
That seems to be the crucial contrast emerging, yes. The stability offered by those China-backed economic corridors, like the BRI projects we discussed, creates relatively reliable, predictable, multi-year demand for skilled labor and resources across South and Southeast Asia.
Offering an alternative pathway for talent circulation.
Exactly. It provides a different model compared to relying heavily on domestic immigration policies that, as we're seeing so clearly in Japan right now, can become constantly hostage to shifting public sentiment, political polarization, and the rise of nationalist or anti-immigrant movements like the Sansedo Party, fueled by those street protests.
It really brings us full circle, doesn't it? We started with that stark image. Two simultaneous events in Japan, the sterile, high-level handshake in a quiet room, logically solving an undeniable economic and demographic crisis through the India partnership. And contrasted with that, the loud, raw, emotional protest on the streets, fearing a cultural crisis.
A deep crack right down the middle, as you put it.
And this deep dive really reveals that this is the central tension, the core challenge facing modern Japan right now. It's a nation trying to solve an unavoidable economic problem with what seems like a logical policy solution, but that very solution ignites this powerful, deeply human social and cultural fear among its own people.
And when we contrast that volatile, high-friction approach unfolding in Japan with the more integrated, state-led models we've discussed in China, we get a really crucial perspective, I think.
How would you summarize that contrast?
Well, we see China attempting to leverage internal technology investment to address its labor gaps domestically first, minimizing social disruption, and then simultaneously using these highly structured long-term economic corridors like the BRI, alongside proactive cultural diplomacy, to manage its international talent exchange and project a stable national identity outward.
So, two very different philosophies for managing similar pressures.
It seems so. And the deep dive into these contrasting approaches in Japan and China, I think it reveals that the fundamental challenge for major Asian powers today isn't merely about securing enough hands to do the work. That's part of it, of course. But maybe the deeper question is whether economic necessity must inevitably lead to this kind of intense cultural friction and social backlash, or is strategic investment in technology, combined with managed, predictable international partnerships, can perhaps achieve prosperity without igniting that powerful, elemental human fear of identity loss.